One of the things I find really, really inspiring is when someone has achieved a lot of success and they still continue to grow in new ways. To me, I think that's the whole reason we're here. Like this whole gig, as I call it, is to uncover our many unique dimensions and our many unique gifts, because we all have them, and to continue to find new ways to express them. And I'm always really inspired by people who do that. And that is my guest today. And I'm so, so excited for this conversation because not only is she an inspiration, but she's also someone I've known for a while through her many reinventions and someone I consider a friend. Fran Hauser is a best-selling author, keynote speaker, media executive, and a champion for women in the workplace, which I love. She's spoken to over 200 organizations and authored 2 books. My favorite, The Myth of the Nice Girl, and another awesome book/workbook called Embrace the Work, Love Your Career. Fran's own publishing journey was so fueling and rewarding that she's actually created Bookbound, which is a company dedicated to launching female nonfiction authors. As a former Fortune 500 executive and active startup investor, Fran has funded over 40 female-founded companies. Wow. Fran, welcome to Reinventability. Thanks so much for being here.
I'm so happy to be here and to see you, Nataly.
Yeah. Fran and I joke, everyone, that whenever Fran's been on my podcast, we've done things together. We're always like, oh, we're so busy, but this is such a great chance for us to have a conversation and catch up. That's right. I'll keep starting podcasts, Fran, so we have another excuse.
Perfection. I love it.
So, Fran, as I was just saying, and I know I've said this to you, like one of the things that really inspires me about you is, by all measures, you achieved a lot of success. You were, I think, the president of Time Inc. When I first met you in that office. That's a lot of success. You had a lot of impact. You fueled a lot of people, and yet you continue to reinvent in so many ways. So I'd love to hear, is there a common thread, or not even a thread, like what is that inner spark that lights you up to continue to reinvent in these very different ways?
So actually I was the president of digital at Time Inc.
Digital, yes.
So
Digital Time
you know
Inc.
what? It's interesting. A lot of people say that. They say that I was the president of Time Inc. And I'm like, okay, that's good. Because that's even
Because you should have been, obviously.
I know, right? But thank you. So yeah, and that's when you and I met.
That's right.
I was at Time Inc.
That's right.
And you were working on launching Happier.
Happier.
Right? So
we're not going to say how many years ago that was.
We're not going to say how many years ago that was. But yeah, I have reinvented myself several times. You know, I think about like being in the C-suite at Time Inc. and then, you know, going into kind of my startup investing stage. And, you know, now I'm an author and a speaker. And I'm also doing Bookbound, where I help to launch female nonfiction authors. And when I think about like these reinventions, the one sort of common through line, which I think is interesting, is that I've always really enjoyed mentoring women and championing women in the workplace, in their careers. And if I think about like being a leader at Time Inc., I spent a lot of my time doing that, you know, like really being there for the women on my team and guiding them, coaching them and championing them. And then as a startup investor, like investing in women. And then when I think about being an author and a speaker, I feel like it's like mentoring at scale. It's like taking all of that advice that I've given to professional women, that I've given to founders, and really like kind of codifying it and packaging it, you know, in my books, in my talks. And it's just getting in front of a lot of women at once. But I think what's sort of interesting in that is I gravitate very naturally towards mentoring.
Yes.
And so even though I've reinvented myself, right, it's like that's been the through line. Like when I look at all these different chapters in my career. And I think what's interesting about that is when you find something that you really enjoy doing and that you naturally gravitate to, like it might just manifest in different ways, right?
That's right.
So I've
That's right.
reinvented myself, but it's like, but that's sort of at the core. That's always been at the core.
Yeah. And I love that you're talking about that. And by the way, I was just realizing I should have said this in my introduction. Fran, you and I met because you became an advisor to me when I was launching the tech company at the time, Happier. So that was another way to mentor, right?
Absolutely.
That's how we got connected. Um, and I love that you're talking about that common through line, because one of the things, as I've been reflecting on my own reinvention journey and just mentoring and working with so many people, it always, like when I guide people, we think of reinvention as making external changes, right? Like people say, "Oh, I'm really stuck in my career. I want to quit my job, do something else," or I need to move or be in a different relationship. But it actually begins within. And to me, like this reinventability idea that I've come up with in this podcast and this framework, the first place is to anchor in your core values and in what brings you joy. And what you're talking about is exactly that. So I love that, like you've done all these different things, but your core values and what lights you up and what is meaningful to you, what you love to do, is just, as you said, manifesting in different ways.
Yeah, and I think so much of that is self-awareness, right? It's like that kind of checking in with yourself and doing the work, doing the like reflection and being just hyper aware of what your values are and what brings you joy. Um, and I talk about this a lot because I feel like it's really easy to get into autopilot mode, especially when
Yes.
it comes to our career, when it comes to our work. And when we do that, we're just more likely to be complacent and
Mm-hmm.
we're less likely to make conscious decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like getting out of autopilot mode and really checking in with yourself on what's important to you, is a huge part of when you think about, reinvention. The other thing that I'll say too is I think sometimes when we use that word reinvention, we automatically jump to it's like something dramatic, like
Yes.
where you're like,
Yes.
you're like moving from like one industry to a completely different industry, or you're like dropping out of corporate to do something else. Or um, reinventions can also be smaller. There's like a scale,
Mhm.
a very, very wide range, I think, when it comes to reinventing yourself.
Yeah. I think that's such a great point. I was just speaking with this woman leader that I mentor, who's been an executive at a fairly well-known nonprofit for a long time, 15 years, maybe more. And she has started to feel that inner friction. We began to work together because she started to feel, I think, that kind of autopilotness, a little bit stagnant. And as we've been talking, her first instinct was, okay, have to do something else, like gonna do something else. And as we've been kind of workshopping that and diving in, some of the opportunities that she's now looking at is taking on just a different role, because taking on a different role functionally is quite different. She'd be working with different people. She'd actually have a different focus. And so I think that's such an important thing. You might love hearing this, Fran. I don't know if I shared this with you. When I went through my burnout, and I really needed a reinvention in many ways. But my first instinct was, I think I even write about this in my book. Oh my God, I have to burn it all down. I'm just going to run away to Nepal and become a monk and like meditate in the mountains. Because there's that instinct that we have that if we change things on the outside, things will change on the inside. But it doesn't work like that.
Oh gosh, that's such a great point. And you're right. That's where we go. Like that, I can't tell you how many women have said something along those lines to me where they're
Mhm.
just feeling really stuck, they're feeling really bored, and they want to just like burn it all down and like go do something that's just so drastically different, thinking that that's going to solve that's going to address whatever like the inner turmoil that they're going through
Yeah.
is, right? And so yeah, I do. And sometimes I also encourage women to look at what's going well for them in their current role, because sometimes it's like hard to see.
Hmm.
It's very easy to just say like none of it is working, when maybe there is something about your current role that's working, and maybe there's a way to go deeper into that and lean into that more to make your current role more joyful.
What
Like
a great piece of advice. Sorry, I just like, what a great piece of advice. But keep going, as I have
yeah.
something to say, but what
Well,
a
I
great thing to
just,
emphasize.
I remember like when I was at Time and I had been there for, I don't know, probably 8 years, and I was starting to get like that itch, and like the more responsibility you take on, sometimes the less fulfilling the role is. Like, so
Yeah.
I got to this place where I was president of digital, and I felt like my job had become so administrative. Like, I was spending so much of my time like on budgets and like
Mm-hmm.
cost cutting and like preparing decks for the board,
Mm-hmm.
and versus like really working closely on the brands and like with the people, my teammates. And so I was starting to feel that itch, and I did a little bit of like that reflection of like, well, what do I like about my role? And what I realized was that the best thing about my role was meeting with startup founders. It was meeting with people like you
Yeah.
back then, where, we first met to talk about, is there a way that we could partner? Is there a
Mm-hmm.
way for Timing to partner with your company? And I loved that part of my job because I felt like I was learning so much. I was meeting really interesting people. It was like a very creative
Mm-hmm.
use of my brain. And so I decided that I wanted to talk to our CEO about creating an innovation lab that I could run as sort of like a side thing. Like, while
Uh-huh.
I would still be president of digital, but I'm like, what could I do to just like make my job more enjoyable, make it more fun? And I decided to like lean into that part of my role. And she gave me the okay, to go ahead and do that. And it really kept me at the company, I would say, for another 2 years,
Mm-hmm.
before I ended up leaving. So I always encourage people to do that because it's really easy. Like, the grass is always greener on the other side. And
Yes.
so just kind of like pay attention. Look at this exercise that I do that I love is I I've done this so many times in my career where I look at my calendar for the last few months
Mm-hmm.
and I pick out the meetings, the experiences, the conversations that put a smile on my face. And then I think about like why? Like, why was this so fulfilling? What was it about it? Was it the type of problem I was solving? Was it the people that I was with? Like, what was it that was so fulfilling, and how can I do more of that?
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's like a really good, very tangible takeaway, I
Yes.
think, for your
Yes.
listeners, for anybody who's feeling stuck.
Yeah, no, it's fantastic. So I call this, I think I have a similar, I always love when there's so many like overlaps in our work. When I work with people, I call this aliveness audit.
Mm,
So exactly, so I just have them look back a month, but several months. I think pick a time, pick a
mm,
whatever,
whatever.
and I have them look back through their calendar, their to-do lists, their photos on their phone, and what are the moments of aliveness, right?
Mm,
Because I think that for me, it's one of my favorite words. Like when we feel that aliveness, it means something is interesting, we're enthusiastic. And I cannot agree with you more. Those are easy. Our brain has a negativity bias, right? We focus much more on this is the annoying part of my job, or this is what's not fulfilling, or my boss is driving me crazy. The brain is always going to overfocus on the negative. So we forget. And when I have people do this audit, the aliveness audit, often the insights are like what you had, like, hey, there's this one part of my life or my job that lights me up.
yeah.
So then the question is, how can you do that more? I love that. What a beautiful way. So let's actually, now that we've talked about aliveness, I want to talk about fear because I think that one of the other big blocks that stand in the way of people really growing and reinventing is fear of doing something new. Did you have fear, Fran, when you left Time and you started writing and now you're launching, Bookbound as a whole new effort? Did you have fear?
So much fear. Like, it, and I remember this. I remember this so viscerally because I remember thinking, again, negativity bias, right? I remember thinking that Time was such a huge platform, like, for me to be
Mm.
attached to, and that I could pick up the phone and call anybody and get a call back. Um, and my fear was around Fran Hauser, me as a person, um, carrying that same kind of
Hmm.
power and weight, like, without the media platform that I
Yeah.
was attached to. So I had huge fear around, like, can I do this on my own?
Hmm.
And it took me a really long time. I really do think it took a few years, those last few years that I was at Time, where I was like thinking about leaving, but one of the things that I consciously did that I think really helped me get over the fear was once I decided that I love the startup world and I'm going to do this innovation lab, but I'm also going to start investing in and advising companies as kind of a side hustle. While I'm at time, I'm going to start doing this and I'm going to see if I like it. Talk about
Mm-hmm.
aliveness, right? Is this something that I want? Do I see myself doing this full time?
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to test the waters. And while I was doing that, I made a commitment to myself that I would really work on building my network in the startup world. So, meeting founders, meeting venture capitalists, meeting angel investors, because in my mind, one way to mitigate the fear and mitigate risk is to have a cushion of people that will be there to
Mm-hmm.
help me seamlessly, hopefully seamlessly, transition into this new world. And so I was very focused on that. And I think, Nataly, that was a huge part of
Mm-hmm.
my being able to transition into startup investing is when I put up that shingle and now it's like Fran Hauser as a startup investor. I had all of these people who were like sharing deals with me. And, you need to meet this founder. They're building this really cool company. You need to speak on this panel. I remember like I didn't know what to ask as an advisor. Like, there's one thing, right? To like write a check and you invest in
Yeah.
a company and you get equity. But I also took on advising,
Yeah.
agreements. And it's like, how much equity do you ask for?
Mm-hmm.
Having people who have done this a million times that I could talk to and to help me think that through, or like, how do
Mm-hmm.
you value a company, right? So for me, yes, there was this fear, but then it was, okay, so what can I do to make the fear a little bit less?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
that was super helpful to me. This idea of like, first I'm going to test it out and like actually
Yes.
see, do I like it? And I'm going to build a network. And I always say this, I feel like when you're reinventing yourself, when you're transitioning into something new, your network is more important than your skills.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we always talk about transferable skills, right? But it's like, I believe it's more about the people.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about the people that you have surrounding you that will open doors for you, that will be a sounding board, um, that will help you kind of find your way. And
Mm-hmm.
so that to me, that was like that was a big thing for me in
Mm-hmm.
making that transition.
Yeah, and listening to you talk about test driving, I think um, that's another really important thing to just consider in any reinvention, whether you're doing it within a company, within a career field, or into something new. Because just like we were talking about, when I felt burnt out, I just wanted to run away. I, it we also talk about like starting something new as taking a big leap, and it's actually a term that I've tried to not use so much. Now, I am someone who in my career, I did take some wild leaps without the network and without thinking it through. It's easier to do when you're younger. You don't have a mortgage, you don't have a family. But I think this idea of test driving, I think about this as learning action, right? So what if we think about, okay, so I'm thinking of making this change. And I often think about, what if the goal for the action I'm going to take is not that it's going to work out perfectly, but the goal is I'm going to learn a lot, including about, do I like doing this? Is this something that I want to do more of? How can I get better at this? And so I think that's a really important part of making any change, is like, start taking learning action, which is what you did.
Yeah.
And then you learned that you actually do love it.
Well, I really appreciate that you said that because it just makes me think about how, based on where we are in our lives, we have different levels of risk tolerance. And I
Mm-hmm.
agree with you. Like when I was younger, like I left Coca-Cola, like one of the world's most admired companies when I
Yeah.
was like in my late 20s, to go to work for Movie Phone.
I didn't know you worked
777
for Movie
film.
Phone. That's so
Natalie,
cool.
that can you believe it? Like literally it
Yeah.
was like this very early stage company.
Yeah.
They were just like going onto the internet. It was like the first like movie show times and ticketing online. And like I just remember telling people at Coke that like where I was going, and they literally all thought I was like
Uh-huh.
bonkers. Like,
Uh-huh.
what are you taking?
Yes.
Like half of them didn't even know what it was.
Yeah.
But like back then, I was in my late 20s. I could take that risk. And
Yeah.
also the reason I was taking the risk was because the internet was just getting going. And I'm
Hmm.
like, this is
Hmm.
kind of like, this is really interesting what's going on over here. And I kind of want to go see like what's going on and how can I learn? And like, you know, talk about a reinvention, right? Like, so, but there are like, based on where we are in our
Hmm.
lives, like when I was at Time, fast forward many, many, many years, now like I'm married, I have kids, it's just a
Yeah.
different risk profile,
And I
right?
think it's so that goes back to self awareness, right? Like that is part of the consideration. Just listening to you talk made me remember. So after college, I went to work at McKinsey, which is like Coca Cola. McKinsey,
Yeah.
was the gold standard. I mean, it was the job that everybody remotely in business wanted. Here I was, office on Park Avenue, and me, a refugee, like I'd only been in the country a few years. So this was like, I remember my parents coming to visit the office. We walked down Madison and they were like, wow, you have really made it. Like, it's amazing. And after about 18 months, because it was also 2000, so the dot-com boom was happening, I took a giant leap and I left. And not only did I leave for a startup with a completely unproven idea that actually McKinsey was working for, but at McKinsey, for the first 2 years when you join as a business analyst, you're expected to stay 2 years. It's not a written contract, but it's pretty much the expectation. And then if you're doing well, you go to business school, you can go any top business school you want. If you come back, they pay for it. So just, you have this golden path to a pretty good future. And 18 months in, I left. And I remember to your experience, and I was doing really well. McKinsey stack ranked its analyst. I was ranked so they were shocked. And I remember, Fran, the same experience where all these different partners were coming to talk to me. And they were like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, do you understand what you're giving up? And, the honest answer, I didn't. And in a way, I think that's also an important thing to consider to talk about is, in a way, I think it's a good thing. I think if I thought about it too much, I might have stayed. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't end up where I am now, which I really feel is my life's work, but I fear that I might have really golden handcuffed myself to a place because I had this like refugee background and, but just I had that experience.
Yeah.
But I was 24.
Yeah.
So I could take a leap. And by the way, the startup I went to, it totally imploded 6 months later in the dot-com bust. Like there's no rosy ending to the
No.
story.
Right. There was like the
Zero.
dot-com bubble and then the dot-com, right. The dot-com
That's right.
boom and then the bust.
That's right.
Yeah.
I don't have, this story does not have a great ending. Like it imploded. But I think when we're younger, we can take more risk. And
For
I
sure.
think it's really the self-awareness, I think, is even more important as we get older. And part of that awareness is also not just what like the family situation or income, but like how much risk can I tolerate?
Mhm.
And then to your point, what can I do to mitigate it?
Yes. Yes.
Like I love the test driving. I love this idea of building a network.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about, because Fran, that's something that I feel you have these, like just even getting to know you, like as you and I become friends, you have this really beautiful way to like authentically connect and build this really natural network. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because that's like a big scary word. Network, ew.
Yeah. Yeah.
Ooh, scary. I don't know. Like, can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. Look, oh gosh, it's just so important. Like when I think about the different transitions that I've made, when I think about the different chapters that I've had in my career, and in my life, like it just always comes back to the people and to my relationships, right? And it's like, I do remember a moment when I was at Time Inc. and I kind of looked up and I was like, huh, everybody in my network, like they're all media people. And I was like, this is not good. Like I just remember having this moment because I had just like been at a lunch and we were all talking about the same issues, like in the media world with advertising revenue and paying for content and the paywall and I'm like, I don't know, like I was feeling like a little bored. It's like I just keep talking about the same things. And I remember like being very intentional in that moment about connecting with people outside of media, like outside of the industry that I was in. So I decided like I was really interested in the technology space. I was really interested in the nonprofit space, like just kind of thinking about like my future, like
Mm-hmm.
future Fran, like what do I kind of see myself potentially
Yeah.
like doing? And I really made an effort to meet people outside of media. Like one example that I'll share with you is I was reading the book Half the Sky by Nick Kristof and Cheryl
Mm-hmm.
Luton. And in the back of the book, they mentioned a nonprofit organization called Global Giving. And I remember like reading about global giving, using technology for good. And I was like, gosh, this is such a cool organization. Like, I wonder if I could be helpful to them in some way. And I just sent a cold email to the founder and CEO, Tamari Kurishi, and introduced myself and, said, would love to meet. And just like, next time I'm in New York, let's get together. And we
Mm-hmm.
did. And we got to know each other. And I started being helpful. I ended up joining their board. I was on their board for like 10 years. But it all just started like with me being curious about,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm reading and I'm like, oh, I'm curious about this, and just like reaching out and gosh, global giving and like being on that board and all of the relationships like that came from that. Those are people I never would have met through
Yeah.
my work at People Magazine or
Yeah.
InStyle or,
Yeah.
So I feel like sometimes like it's really important to be intentional about who are the people, like the types of people that you want to let in to your
Mm-hmm.
world.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and being like very aware of like what does your current network look like and how do you feel about it,
Mm-hmm.
like, and it's even then thinking about like I always talk about like my dream team, like whether it's like somebody who's mentoring me, it could be somebody senior to me, it could be somebody outside of the company, it could be a peer, it could be like a personal like friend. But I always think about like who are my go-to's, who are those people that like when I need a sounding board, when I'm stuck,
Mm-hmm.
when I'm like really struggling with a decision, like who are those few people that are my go-to. So like those are
Yeah.
that's my dream team. And then I have like my bigger
Yeah.
network.
It's a great
But
way to think about it.
yeah, but it
Yeah.
is really important to prioritize meeting new people, like having that curiosity, saying
Mm-hmm.
yes,
Yes.
even if there's like not a foreseeable benefit, um,
Mm-hmm.
you never know like what could come out of the interaction and the meeting.
Yeah. And I think that's such an important point, curiosity and just doing it, reaching out to people. Like I love the example. I didn't know because I knew you were on the board of Global Giving, but I didn't know it started with a cold email. Um, I think, and I'm thinking, just reflecting, to be honest with myself, sometimes there's like this feeling of, oh, I'm going to reach out to this person, but like, why would they talk to me or what? And I think we spend too much time on that, really judging our value versus really recognizing that it might be a really interesting conversation for them too. And there might be something that we could be helpful with. I remember a bunch of years ago, I was at an event, I don't remember which it was. And the movie director, Brian Glazer, is it Grazer?
Mhm.
I always, is it
Police,
Glazer or
police are
Grazer? Correct us if we're wrong. Brian Glazer, I think. Avi, my husband, is going to be listening to this. Go, I can't believe he's a movie buff. He's like, I can't believe you don't know this. Anyway, and he was being interviewed on stage, and he talked about something that's really stayed with me. When he was in his 20s and like a nobody, he was like, I don't know, delivering mail, I think, for movie studios or something like that. He decided to start this thing that I think he called later Curiosity Conversations. And I think that's what he called them. That's what they stayed with me. And he's kept this up for 30 years. And what he does is he finds people he's curious to learn more. And at this point, he's very famous. So he can talk to top nuclear scientists and he's talked to political leaders and artists. But he started doing this when he didn't have any of that. And he would learn about this person. He would reach out to them and say, I just want to spend an hour with you. Here's what I'd love to talk about. So he did his homework. And it was so inspiring. And he talked about how it completely, like, fundamentally made his life so much richer.
Wow.
In addition to the fact that there were relationships, but he said just And he talked to marine biologists and physicists and nuclear scientists and like political leaders and artists and but his core driver was, I'm curious to learn more, you know?
I love
And
that.
I remember listening to that and like, it's what you're talking about. And I feel like we've lost a little bit of that, right? There's this feeling that I sometimes have of like, and again, I catch myself too, that it's a bit transactional. So if I reach out to this person, what can I give them? Right? It's a little bit that. And I think it's almost like we have to get back to our humanness. We all have something really interesting to offer.
Yes. Yes. I really love that you said that. And I think the one kind of tactical thing that
Hmm.
I have to say this because this still happens to me where sometimes I'll get like a DM on LinkedIn or I'll have someone like email me through the website. And they'll just say something like, "Can I pick your brain?"
Oh,
And
oh
that's
my God.
really, I know, right?
I hate that. I just like the
Literally
sound of that. I hate.
like, "Can I pick your brain?" Just,
Mm,
you know what? I feel like it's like it's not respectful. You're not
yeah.
respecting me or my time. Whereas Brian, in his way, he actually did the homework. He did the research. I'm sure his email was so thoughtful, right?
Hmm.
About like
Hmm.
here's, I'd love to talk to you about these things. But yeah, but the whole like, can I pick your brain? Like, can we go out for coffee and can I pick your brain? Does not work.
Yeah. As you're talking, I just have to look up, is it Glazer or
Yeah, can you? And
Grazer?
Natalie, while you do that, they're gonna have to edit this out. My dog is at my door. Hold on.
Oh, that's fine.
Rocky, come on. I know this. I
I don't even need to edit this out. It's life. We're
it
having a
is like,
conversation, and it is Brian Glazer. Everyone, I finally have figured out it's Brian Glazer. Who, he's an incredible. He's an Oscar-winning producer. He's done incredible things. But again, he started these conversations when I think he was like a mail delivery guy, and so yeah, it's about like doing the work, the homework, right? Like one of the reasons actually that I am launching, decided to launch this new podcast is I want to talk about reinvention. It's something that I is very interesting to me. I think a lot of people need it. I'm working, and I said I want to talk to interesting people about different aspects of it. And that's one of my core reasons for doing this podcast. I want to have these interesting conversations. And it's amazing, like just even in the short time, the new people I've met. But before I reach out, if they have a book, I read their book. If they have I don't know, a TED Talk, I watch their TED Talk. If they don't, I go and read like their blog posts. And like, I think that's really important that we do that because it's also like when we have that outreach and that conversation, we want it to be interesting. And it can't be interesting if it's just picking your brain. I actually don't know what that means to pick the
what
brain.
and it just like sounds so gross. It's like just
Yeah, I know. All right, Fran, I have one last question for you on this. What because you've shared so many insights, but if someone is listening to this and they feel energized and they're like ready to be more curious and test things out, but they have this like deep seated doubt, because I think that's very common. Like, I'm gonna try it, but I just don't know. Like, I don't know if I'm good enough for this new thing. Or what would you say? Like, what's something that you found that works for you and people you mentor?
I usually when I'm in those situations, there's a couple things that I do. Like the first is going back to your negativity bias. Like I know that that's the way that our brains are
Hmm.
wired. So even just being aware of that, like I literally will say to myself, like my thoughts are not reality.
Yes.
And I think that is really important to kind of flip the conversation in your head. Especially women, like based on the work that I've done, I see this so often where we feel like we're underqualified. We feel like we're not
Hmm.
ready. We don't have 100% of the qualifications. Like, how could I go for this? Right. Um, and what I would say is like really stretch yourself, push yourself, because what is the worst thing that could happen,
Hmm.
right? Like you go for it. Okay, here's the worst thing. You don't get it, whatever it is, right? You don't get it. But now you've met somebody really interesting. You're
Hmm.
on their radar. You are demonstrating that you're ambitious, that you're interesting, right? And
Hmm.
you're learning by just going through the process.
Yeah.
Like you're
Yeah.
actually building these muscles that are really important, right? So it's like that's like the worst thing that can happen. So that's the advice that I usually give to myself and
Hmm.
that I give to other people is to like visualize that the worst thing that can happen is still good.
Hmm.
It's,
I love that.
that's it. It's like
Yeah.
that's
I love that. And the other, just an aspect of it, I think that's also important is if you've stretched yourself, whatever that is, you reached out to someone or went to talk to your boss about more responsibility or started to write a book, whatever that is, one that just that act of you growing and stretching, I think has so much benefit. Even if the outcome is not at all what you thought you wanted, just, I posted this on LinkedIn like right before we started to record this. I've been studying and teaching happiness for 10 years, right? That was my first field of like, that's the first part of my body of work. And I've realized, and I think things like gratitude and self-compassion and self-care and kindness and connecting to your sense of purpose, all really important. But I realized there was one missing piece: growth. I don't think it's possible to really feel fulfilled and happy if we're not growing, because then we're wilting. I don't think there's a neutral state. A tree is either wilting or it's growing. And
mm,
so I think just the act, as you said, of stretching, even if the outcome, like the person says no, or whatever you're thinking about doing is not working out, then you become our identity is our actions, right? So then you become the person who stretches, who grows, and then you're more confident in trying something else.
yes, and know that your brain is going to try to hijack you. Like just like
Yes.
literally like go into it knowing that.
Yeah.
So it's just flipping the script is a
Yeah.
big part of
Yeah.
it.
Yeah. Fran, thank you so much. We say this every time. We could talk for hours and hours. And like I said, I'll just keep
We'll just keep
creating these things so we
I
can do.
I'm so in. I love it. I just love spending time with you. Thank you so much
Yeah,
for having me.
big ditto. Big ditto. Thank you for you. Thank you for, I always learn something when we connect. And one of the things I so appreciate about you is not just the wisdom you share, but the warmth, the genuine warmth and lovingness with which you do it. I think it's one of your gifts. I think it's what makes you really, really special. So thank you. And to our listeners and those of you watching, thank you for thank you for tuning in. If what we talked about resonates with you, please rate and review this podcast. It's new, so this will help other people discover it and learn from it. If you heard something that someone in your life could benefit from, please share it with them. And I will see and be in your ear for our next episode. Take care, everyone.